most of the problems you're going to deal with as an affiliate owner are directly related to people. So in this video, I'm going to walk through frameworks so that you can build, train, and retain really, really high quality people, ultimately building a great culture inside of your CrossFit affiliate. I'm Jason Fernandez, aka Fern, co-host of Best Hours of the Day podcast, where we review everything inside of the CrossFit space, and I've produced over 700 podcasts solely about CrossFit training and running an affiliate. We work with over 1,000 affiliators all over the world. Our whole goal is to provide you guys as much value as we humanly can. And if you guys need help, you can reach out to us and we'd be more than happy to help you do that. But in this video, we're going to talk about building a world-class team. I'm going to give you everything I can with regard to this, things that I've learned in the military, things that I've learned in the nonprofit space, things that I've learned running my affiliate for 16 years, working for HQ, things that I've learned from other business leaders, thought leaders in the space. And I'm going to try to give you all of that inside of this video. And again, inside of this video, or inside of this series, we are taking a new approach where everything in this series is about going as deep as humanly possible on a singular topic so that we can unpack as many layers of that given topic as we possibly can and leave out absolutely nothing. So as we work through these videos, I'm pulling no punches. I'm giving you absolutely everything that I have and hope to give you guys the tools so that you guys can be as successful as possible. So what we're going to do is talking about people, right? Because people are awesome and simultaneously people suck. And I'm talking about other people and I'm talking about you and I. We can both be awesome and we can both suck. And I think the way we manage that, whether it's managing externally or internally, is a really important component of that. So again, leadership is hard. I'll just leave with that. It's earned every single day. And I can tell you that having spent some time in the military doing that kind of stuff, there's good and bad examples of leadership everywhere as long as you're paying attention and looking. So I'm going to walk you through some frameworks and some different components of that and how we approach building a team inside of Best Hour, specifically inside of Affiliate University for box owners. Okay, so the way I want to lay this out is this process, because I think, if I look back at my different experiences and if I were to be able to take all of that and bundle it, in what order would I do it? And it kind of works like this. First thing is getting clarity. Who are you? What do you do? Who is your daddy? What do you do? If you're old enough to remember that movie. But getting clarity on who you are and then learning to manage yourself and then learning to manage them. And I think when you do this out of order, everything is just really, really hard. And again, business is hard by itself. You don't need to make it any harder. So hopefully this process is going to take you through some of the stuff that I've learned. So I want to walk you through my experiences and some of the things that helped me over the years not suck at being a leader, or at least suck less at being a leader. But this is going to be the order that we're going to work in: clarity, you, and then them. Now, inside of any organization, there's this kind of top-down approach versus the bottom-up approach. And with a lot of the frameworks that we're going to be looking at here and walking through, it's going to help you kind of balance these two things out, right? Should it be top-down and should it be bottom-up? And the reality is, it depends on the scenario. But at the end of the day, I want to be able to do both. And this is very similar to the technique and intensity lecture that Coach Glassman so graciously gave us years ago. And it's not, move fast at all costs. It's like, hey, I want you to move as fast as you can move well. And I want you to apply the same concept here, which is some things inside of the affiliate are going to be top down and other things are going to be bottom up. What I want to help you work through is, how do I determine what's going to be top down, what's going to be bottom up, and then how do I manage those two scenarios via how do I disseminate information and how do I manage my team? Because if you're doing this effectively, you should have a really good mix of both of those. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to lay out in this entire video, what are the ingredients for success and how can you use all these models in order to grow a really, really high functioning team so that you can impact as many people as possible. So when we're talking about the ingredients for success, they kind of look like this. One is clarity, meaning everybody has to understand what the objective is. They have to understand where we're going, why we're doing it, when we want to get there. I want everybody to be crystal clear on what the objective and what the outcomes are going to be. And then inside of that, I want there to be both objective, or kind of overt and subliminal signaling happening all the time with regard to how we're communicating it and what are the messages, whether they be, completely obvious or not so obvious, that are going on inside of the team. And those can be an email that is, very specifically stated to be like, read this is important about our mission and values. Or it could be more subtle about how you interact with somebody inside of a Slack channel that's public about a mistake that may have happened in the gym. And those are both examples of signaling. And then lastly, the piece is consistency, meaning you got to do these things all the time. And when I first started working through this process, this idea of being on top of things and reinforcing things all the time felt really, really exhausting. But the reality is, like, that's just what it takes as a leader. You have to be more hard-headed, you have to be more stubborn, and you have to be more inclined to deal with pain than everybody else if you're going to be a really, really great leader. Because again, leadership is not easy. But I will tell you, it is one of the most rewarding things you can ever do if you even get it remotely right. And these are some of the things that I found as ingredients for success: clarity, signaling, and consistency. And just like if we think back to your CrossFit level 1, we think about the 10 general physical skills. It's our cardiorespiratory endurance, flexibility, strength, stamina. You know the list. The whole premise of giving you those was balance across all of those. And we say, hey, nature has no obligation to this list, but you could see how a deficiency in any one of these would lead to a loss of game, mission, or life. And it's the same thing with this list, which is like, hey, deficiency in any one of these, whether it be clarity, signaling, or consistency, is going to lead to a breakdown in your team. So we have to understand, like, I want to be well balanced across all three of these. And some of this stuff is going to be you just training yourself to do it, but you can build in processes and systems in order to make this happen, to optimize this the best you can. Okay, so we're going to start with something that I used to be very, very against, and it's this idea of core values. And if you're like me and every other affiliate owner, every other business owner, you've gone through this process of coming up with your core values. And almost always you go through this process of you write down a bunch of stuff, and then you start picking out words that look cool or feel good to you, and all of a sudden you've got this set of core values. And if we were really to dig deep into those core values, they don't actually fucking mean anything, right? And I want to walk you through something that I recently went through that really shed a light on how to do this effectively. And listen, if you like your core values, that's great. And I'm happy for you, right? But when we think about core values, effective core values should be stress tested, meaning I'm going to give you a worst case scenario, and I'm going to see how those core values guide your decision-making process inside of that worst case scenario. And if they don't, then my recommendation to you is you should throw those core values in the trash and you should start over. But I'm going to walk you through a process on how you can find what I think are the right core values for you in this process. So a lot of instances when we think about core values, this is typically the process that we work through, right? So we go through and we write a big list of words on there, and we've got our core values, and then we use those core values to then try to drive behavior, right? So in the Navy, honor, courage, commitment, we say this is what we're going to do, and these are going to be our core values for the Navy, right? And what we find more often than not is this is an ineffective way to work through that, right? So what we've done is we've kind of started backwards and we've gone to core values, and then we're going to try to drive the behavior. When the more effective way to do this is you start with behavior, and then what you do is you turn those into core values, right? And this is a really important distinction. So this one is very effective. This one breaks down rather easily. Now, what does that look like in practical application? So again, the issue with just coming up with your core values first and then trying to jam behaviors into those core values is they're typically not true to you, meaning like you saw them on a paper, there was no real kind of observation about who you are, what your life experiences are. And I recently went through this, and it was really, really eye-opening for me. So the more effective way to do this, and we'll trickle down into why this is effective here in just a second, is to work through who are you as a person? What are your experiences? And I went through a 3-hour interview for this, and basically it was just like working through my life story. And then as you go through that process, you'll be able to extract different themes inside of your life. I don't even know you're watching this, but everybody that's watching this can go through this process. And you're going to be able to extract those. And you'll probably have 8 to 10 different themes inside of that. And then what you're going to do is you're going to whittle those down. And you're going to come up with what are your actual core values, like things that you have done repeatedly, knowingly or unknowingly throughout your life. And these are your actual core values. And the reason this is so much more effective is you no longer have to change behavior to accommodate those core values. That is just how we operate. Because if we think about culture, and that's really what we're driving towards, like this leads to this idea of culture, right? Now, what is culture? Culture is just a series of behaviors that can be observed inside of any given organization or person. That's really all they are. So culture is not a series of words on a wall or any of that bullshit. Culture is anytime somebody walks by a piece of trash, they pick it up unprompted and not being asked to do so, right? That's just how we operate inside of the affiliate. Culture is, if you read the All Blacks book called Legacy, culture, what they have is everybody sweeps the sheds, meaning like regardless of seniority on the team, everybody cleans the locker room. Everybody grabs a broom, everybody puts the laundry, because inside of their culture, one of their objectives is to leave the jersey better than they found it. So when we're talking about culture, the behavior can then drive the core values. What you have to do is you have to observe your own behavior over a period of time. You have to define the behavior, and then that behavior can be disseminated down. Because understand, all of this starts with you. So if we're not true to our core values, it's going to be really hard to lead a team. If I'm trying to be somebody that I'm not, or if I'm trying to be things that are not true and natural to who I am. And this sounds a little like woo-woo or whatever, but this has been a really, really eye-opening experience for me. And quite frankly, it just feels better. So I'll give you an example. One of the core values inside of CrossFit, right? It sounds a little bit weird, but it's send the elevator back down. Now, why did I come up with that? Well, what I came up with was when we were evaluating, and I was telling the story about, how we develop coaches in CrossFit Rife, and, how many level 4 coaches we've had and how many people have got on seminar staff and how many level 3s we have. All of this was derived from my desire to share information with other people. And this idea of send the elevator back down is you should be sharing information to bring people up to your level. And that was always my intent. I just really hadn't defined it and captured it appropriately. Now, this is really, really important because now that I've defined that, that can now become a guiding tenet for how we operate as a team. And I don't have to force that. That is just who I am. So I can now live the core values outright. And more importantly, the core values that we come up with, they can be easily observed in any sort of naturally occurring environment, right? So sending the elevator back down is one coach helping another coach rewrite their lesson plan. Send the elevator back down is helping somebody, manage or help somebody get their client profile set up because the newer coach doesn't know how to work your CRM, right? That's an example of send the elevator back down. Same thing with be a great teammate. That was extracted out of my time of being on sports teams and being in the military. Being a great teammate is really, really important to me. It's like I don't want to be the weak link inside of that chain. So these are things that are true to me. I didn't read those first and then try to jam behaviors into them. I observed who I was as a person, and then I took those behaviors and I defined them, and now we can try to replicate those over and over and over and over. So I just wanted to share with you how I worked through that process and why I think this is a much more effective way of coming up with your core values, because the core values have a significant trickle-down effect when they're developed correctly. And when they're developed correctly, now it's much easier to lead your team. When you have a great team, everything is more fun. Now I want to take this one step further. So you've got your core values, and then there's something that I also learned, which is called your core belief. So this is taking your set of core values and then essentially transforming them into a statement. So I want to kind of back my way into why this is such an important thing and then give you an example of, with regard to CrossFit Rife. So for years, we've always really put a lot of time and attention into creating the best possible coaching staff that we possibly can. So I've told you guys we have 3 level 4s on our staff. We have a total of, I think, 6 level 3s in there. Everybody has a level 2. And I would be very confident and I think at least 1 or 2 of them could pass the level 4 right now. But I would be very confident having anybody come in and observing what it is that we do from a coaching standpoint. Now, with all that said, I've told my staff for many, many years that is never something we're going to hang our hat on, meaning like we're level 4s, like, yeah, good for us, right? And the reason we don't hang our hat on that is because this idea of trying to browbeat the world with the idea that we're really good is based on the false assumption that the end user or the consumer knows what that means, right? And I can tell you, having seen, 5 to 10,000 people walk into a CrossFit affiliate, nobody has any idea what a good coach is. They just assume that you are good and you know what you're doing because you work there, right? They're like, okay, this guy's not a dumbass. He works here. They clearly employed him. And if you think about that, you really can't hang your hat on that, right? Because there's an ignorance involved with a person who's coming in and the consumer with regard to who you are and what your skill set is. If somebody walks into my gym who's never done CrossFit, they don't know that I'm a flow master on seminar stuff. They have no idea what that means, right? Tell them I'm a level 4 and there's levels 1 through 4. They could think that level 1 is the highest, right? That kind of makes a little bit of sense. And they would think I'm the worst in that scenario. So there's just a lot of assumptions that we're not going to hang our hat on inside of there. And what I tell people is that, like, hey, nobody knows, very few people know what good coaching is until they've been around for a little while. And now they have some sort of, reference point for what good coaching is. So if somebody's been in our gym for 2 years and they go to another gym and they come back and they're like, oh, dude, thank you. And you're like, you're welcome. I just couldn't tell you that 3 years ago, right? So thinking about that, and then how do I start to communicate the importance of coaching without making it about us? Because it's not about us, right? It's about the customer, making the customer the hero. So going through this whole process and working through that, the core belief at CrossFit Life is this. It is, we believe that the coach is the single most important variable inside of someone's success. And the reason this is really important is because this paints a picture about how I communicate with the team about who we are and what do we do. Now, if I wanted to give you a visual on this, it would kind of look like this. This circle right here is the coach. This is the client success. And what this states, or what this visually represents, is that at the heart of this person's success is the coach. Now, this is how we communicate that we really think that coaching is important, right? With that very simple picture, which is like that center ball right there is fundamentally predicated on you being successful. And I want to grow that as much as possible. And this is how we communicate that without saying that we're really good coaches. We're saying that our job is to help you be the best that you possibly can be, and that we think that the most important variable in you getting where you want to go is that we do what we were supposed to do, okay? And this is a really important component of this idea of core values and core beliefs, because this creates clarity. This creates an entirely different picture when I'm talking to my team, because nobody is going to misconstrue what I'm talking about when I say this. This is a very clear picture about who we are, what we believe, and how we behave. And clarity kills. Just as a statement of fact, being clear is kind, right? Some little Brene Brown, for you Brene Brown fans out there, which is like, I want to be really clear about who we are and what we do. This now starts to dictate behavior, because when you get really clear on who you are and what you are, what this means is people start to take on that identity, right? You, your staff, everybody. And I want them to take on this identity. I want them to think of themselves as a pivotal piece in somebody else's success. Now they take their job just a little bit more seriously. Now they prep a little bit more before they go to class. They spend a little bit more time on the lesson plan. They spend a little bit more time thinking about progressions and scaling options, because they understand where they sit in this entire equation. And I don't think it could be any more important than understanding how to get clear on this, because this makes everybody's life easier. And fundamentally, you want everybody marching to the beat of the same drum. So enough about clarity. We're going to move on to the next piece. Now, inside of this idea of clarity, I think we've kind of mapped out who we are and what we want to be. And now we want to map out what is the impact on doing my job to the customer. So I want to revisit the service excellence model. And it's fundamentally understanding that the quality of the service provider directly dictates the quality of the service provider. So understanding that this side absolutely 100% controls this side. And this is a really important point to communicate to your coaching staff. They have to understand that if they do a poor job, that is direct correlation to how that is going to be received on the other end. So thinking about how much time they spend on knowing things like points of performance, knowing things like faults, so that all of that stuff is at the forefront of their mind at all times. Because what I like to tell people inside of a level 2 environment is, if you're spending mental resources on things that you should know, like the back of your hand, like knowing the points of performance, like you know your name, now what I can do is I can be more attentive to the people in my care inside of the class, and understanding how this relationships works, and reteaching and re-engaging and reminding people about this service excellence model is really, really important. So you start with clarity, you reinforce the importance of what it is that you're doing and how that impacts the client. And now you can start to set culture, because all of this stuff is very objective, right? This allows you to have hard conversations and set standards and hold standards, more importantly. Okay, so you're clear. You know who you guys are. You've defined it, core values, core beliefs. People understand the value of service. You can even show them the 50-50 model that I've covered in some other videos. And now it's understanding, like, what are the levers that I have available to me as a leader that I can pull on any given time, right? So we're gonna look at this triangle. We're gonna call this the leader levers, right? So what are the things that I can use at my disposal in order to drive the team? So I've got incentives, I've got values and culture, and I've got compensation. You want to be able to move and pull on all three of these levers, right? So when you're thinking about incentives, incentives can be any number of things. Incentives can be continuing education incentives. Incentives can be something very simple like reduce costs on apparel or supplements because you have wholesale provider accounts with any number of providers. Values and culture, this is an important one, going back to like understanding the value of really going through those previous two exercises with regard to your core belief and your core values. When you create a core belief and core values that are truly unique, they really stand out. And what this ends up being is you become very sticky, meaning like people really gravitate to those towards of things. And I recently had somebody reach out to me via email and they said, hey, I'm moving to the area. I've been coaching at this other gym and I'd really like to come and coach at CrossFit Rife. So, I've had a lot of those emails over the years, which I think is I'm very fortunate to get. And so I replied, I said, hey, I'm happy to have a conversation with you. I said, first tough question, how many of these emails did you send? I wanted to know how many emails they sent out to other gyms. And they came back and they said, none. I want to be a coach at your gym, right? Now, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, not the point. The point is that putting a lot of time and energy into setting your culture and values makes it a place that people want to be. If you think about some of the greatest teams in sports, right? The Patriots, the Bulls, right? Like if we think about a lot of those teams, like the Yankees, all these like cultures and value is a big part, right? There's intrinsic value involved in being a part of those organizations that has nothing to do with either incentives or compensation. Now, I want to drive those incentives and I want to create good compensation packages, but understand like you want to have availability to pull on all three of these levers. I want to be able to give people good pay via compensation, right? I want to drive incentives to further their careers so that if they want to, they can use the gym as a launch pad to go to the next thing. And I want them to be ingrained in the values and culture that we create inside of the box. And that's what I want you guys to have. But first thing you have to do is understand like what are the leader levers that I have available to me so that I know how to pull on them appropriately. Because if you have all three at your disposal and you're driving them appropriately, you can, because some people care about compensation, some people care about incentives, and some people care about culture, and some people care about two of the three. But understanding how you can drive this whole thing in order to interact with your team the best way possible is a really, really important component of being a leader because you have to know what they want. Your staff is no different than their clients. I need to find out what they want and then I need to give it to them. Okay, real quick revisit on a previous model, which is manage. So remember, every manager has to manage in 5 different directions. We got to manage up. That could be towards your strategy. If you have a mentor or a board or something along those lines, you're going to have to manage in that direction. Down can be towards your clients. If I move out, that's going to be towards the market. But we're going to be talking a lot about managing in, this is going to be your team. And understand that your team is the most important thing to you as a business owner, right? They're going to be the ones that deliver in your absence. They're going to be the ones either doing the right thing or the wrong thing when nobody's looking. So understanding how to manage your team. In order to do this correctly, the first thing you have to do is you have to be able to manage yourself correctly. So as we work through all of this, I'm hoping this is creating clarity so that you can start to refine your leadership approach so that you can manage your team really, really effectively. But understand it's going to be almost impossible for you to lead your team if you can't manage yourself. So we have to do this first in order to maximize what we do over here. And the beauty of that is when we do this, this has a maximum impact on the clients. So if you think about something like Dunbar's number, which is about 150, meaning the average person can only manage about 150 relationships. And I think some people have come up with this number, and that's why they come up with like you should have 150 clients. But if I have 3 or 4 full-time staff, well, the number is much higher. It's 150 for all of us, right? Which means it's a lot more than 150 because it's not my sole job to manage every relationship inside of the business, right? I just want to make sure that they're managed appropriately. It could be by me or it could be by somebody else. So learning how to manage myself so that I can drive the team so that and then we can drive the clients is a really important component of this. And all it does is amplify your ability to have impact across a broader scale. So if you guys haven't picked up on it, the biggest part about leadership is understanding yourself. And that's why I'm going to harp on a lot of these things as we work through, because a better understanding of yourself, how to behave, how that you can deal with certain scenarios really has a tremendous impact on how you manage your team and how they view you, and then therefore how they interact with your clients. So this is a pretty interesting matrix with regard to what is your bias, right? So if we're going to keep it very, very simple, do I have a bias for thinking or do I have a bias for action? And I can tell you, having been somebody that has in different phases of my life had a tremendous bias for action, there's a lot of downfalls for that, right? So really all we're looking at is, do I tend more to thinking about things versus doing things? And the strongest leaders live here, right? They have a strong bias for both action and thinking. If you find yourself as somebody who has a bias for thinking, that's great. Like, understand that running a good business has a lot to do with thinking about shit, right? Like, think about like, what should I do and when and how and all that kind of stuff. But I also need to take a lot of that thinking, I need to put it into action. And I've been on teams where the whole team has a bias for action, or the whole team has a bias for thinking, or maybe there's a mix of the two. And this is a really important model to understand because, number one, if you're a sole owner operator, you just need to know where your bias sits. So that if you have a bias for thinking, you might need to put in some mechanisms that get you to move towards action. Because if you sit over here or over here, nothing's ever going to get done. Now, conversely, if you just have a bias for action and you're a ready, fire, aim person, Jason Ackerman, then Nate thinks that's funny, then we need to maybe slow down a little bit, right? I can't just fire away and then deal with the repercussions after that without ever having put any thought into it. And we want to have a good balance of these two. And where this becomes really, really important is if you have a partnership. So if you are a gym that has partners, right? And maybe that's a husband, wife combination, or maybe that's actual partners, like business partners scenario. It's really important for you guys to understand, does one of you maybe have a bias for thinking and the other one have a bias for action? Because if you recognize those, then now you can rectify them and you can figure out, hey, if you have a bias for thinking and I have a bias for action, how do we use both of those skills to create what we want? Because if we both can equally live here and learn how to communicate there, we can get the desired outcome. And I think this is a really, really important matrix to look at and understanding that, what are the downfalls of being too heavily biased in one direction or the other? One is inaction, and the other one is poor action, right? And both of those are suboptimal. So we want to figure out, how do we optimize to get the best possible outcome? And just a very simple matrix. It's intended to be directionally correct, not absolutely correct, but I think it just gives a really good framework for just doing a quick self-assessment. Are you somebody who likes to sit around and think about shit all the time? Or are you just constantly doing stuff? Because that can be stuff that doesn't need to be done. Meaning, if you find yourself who's somebody who's always doing a lot of busy work, you probably have a bias for action because you're avoiding thinking. And maybe we should slow down a little bit and figure out, am I putting all of this effort into the right places? And if we're not, then we can redirect that effort. And again, the best leaders live up here and they have both a bias for action and for thinking. Okay, now the next thing we're going to talk about is, as a leader, what are some things that will help you manage change, right? So the only constant in this world is change, and we need to be able to manage that effectively. What I'll tell you, some of my biggest hiccups as a leader, as an affiliate owner, as a naval officer, are been my failures to manage change correctly. So I want to give you guys a framework to work through this, and it's a simple 2x2 matrix, and you're looking at when we're looking at the components of managing change inside of a business, in a business concept or context. On the y-axis, we're going to have the rollout, and on the x-axis, we're going to have timing, right? So I've got whatever it is we might be, it's going to fall somewhere on here. So I'll give you guys a couple of different examples, but understanding on the x-axis over here, I've got slow versus fast. And on the y-axis, I've got limited pilot, meaning like we may or may not do this, versus like this is happening 100%, we're making this change and we got to go. Now, then we have to figure out, like, is it slow or is it fast? And some of that depends. So if we think about some different scenarios where something like doing a website overhaul, that might be something that I want to do fast, we're going to be all in, and I can put something like doing a website change over here, meaning there's not going to be a super heavy cost for moving fast in here, meaning like the costs of any errors inside of that are going to be minimal at best. Now, conversely, if I'm going to do something along the lines of change CRMs, right, which is a really big deal. Anybody's ever been through that knows that the colossal pain in the ass it is as a gym owner, which is timing is, that's not something I want to do fast, right? I want to make sure that everything's buttoned up, nobody gets dropped. So that might go up here. which is like, we're all in, we're making this change. We're going to go cold turkey on one thing and we're going to move everything over to another system. But I want to do this slowly and thoughtfully, meaning I might live in both systems for 1 to maybe 3 months to make sure that there's an appropriate overlap, and then we can collect payment information before we move people over there, all that kind of stuff. Now, if we're looking at something that's maybe not back end or back of the house, let's talk about some things that might be more along the lines of front of the house. If we're going to do like a limited pilot, something like we're going to test a new program or new programming. So maybe we're going to test a limited pilot on programming, right? We're going to make some subtle changes to programming, and I want to do a limited pilot. So we're going to do this in little drips, and I want to do this very slowly over time. Now, if we're looking at something that might be limited pilot and I want to do this quickly, this could be something like changes to your onboarding. Now, the reason that you can do this quickly, but it's a limited pilot, is because you're not sure on the change you want to make on your onboarding. And I can do it quickly because nobody knows that I changed it other than me. Meaning, like, the only people that are experiencing that are people who are going to experience it for the first time, and they're only going to experience it once. So onboarding or making changes to your onboarding can be limited pilot, meaning I'm undecided on the outcome, but I want to do it relatively quickly, collect the information, and then make a follow-on decision about that. So looking at how I manage change, because what you can do is I can take whatever it is that I'm looking at changing, again, whether it be change the CRM, change the website, change the onboarding, or change programming, and I can figure out where it falls in this matrix with regard to rollout and with regard to timing. Because if you do these in the wrong box, things can break and things can get really costly in a lot of different scenarios. So understanding how to basically map out change and figure out, am I doing an appropriate rollout match with the appropriate speed? What this allows you to do too with your team is communicate both of these things. It allows you to communicate the logical reasoning behind the rollout and the speed associated with it. Because, and a lot of times, if you're just rolling things out willy-nilly, this creates a lot of anxiety within your team because they don't know why, they don't know how, and they don't know how they should be reacting with regard to the speed, whether it's slow or fast. So really working through this process, and you could even show them this matrix and be like, here's why we're going to do something that's all in a slow fashion, or maybe it's limited pilot fast. And this is where it makes sense to everybody, and they can get behind the decision so that you can get everybody moving in the same direction. Because when you look at things like this and you map it out this way, what I can do is I can do a big collective push on a particular project. Instead of having this project drag out forever, I can put all resources on that particular project and we can get it done faster and get it to the finish line faster. More tools is better than less. So I wanted to give you guys a different version of that previous 2x2 matrix so that you can apply. And I want to use a real life scenario and apply it to this particular change strategy. So this is just a different way to do it. So if you guys remember back to your level 1, when we talk about the intro to the programming lecture and we talk about the different variables and load, reps, time, all of those are on a spectrum, right? So I've got load, everything from body weight to heavy, time from seconds to hours, reps 0 to hundreds, right? It's a spectrum. So same thing here. I've got a couple different things on here. So I've got scope, origin, rollout, and timing, and all of these exist on a spectrum. So if you think back to your level 1, when we gave the intro to the programming lecture, and we think about like load, reps, and time, those exist on a spectrum, meaning load, no weight to 1 rep max, reps 0 to hundreds, time seconds to hours. So same thing here. So when we're looking at scope, we've got things like, is it incremental in nature, or is it going to be radical? Meaning, like, I'm going to do this parts, or is this going to be like a cold turkey scenario? Origin, is this going to be bottom up driven, or is this going to be top down driven? When you talk about rollout, is it localized? Meaning, is it a component of the business, or is it systemic? Meaning, like, it actually affects everything that we do in the business. And then timing, slow versus fast. So I'm going to give you guys a real life example of where I did a poor job managing a change strategy. So years ago, we bought another affiliate, and we ended up closing that affiliate down, ended up in a lawsuit with the landlord, and it just kept on going. So we just ended up shutting the business down, ended up losing a shitload of money. Lots of lessons learned there. So I'm giving those to you now. Inside of that, one of the things that we did in there is we decided we were going to change programming. So when you buy another gym, you're probably on one program, they're probably on another program. However you feel about programming, that's not the point. It's understanding how to manage change. Like, what is a strategy with regard to managing change? So what we did inside of the affiliate was we did a radical change of the programming, and it was top-down driven. Now, it was localized because we didn't have to do that in both affiliates, and the timing was fast. So we ended up unnecessarily losing clients inside of that change because we did not really think through what the appropriate strategy for changing something like programming would be, right? However you feel about programming, understand that your clients have a bias towards whatever that programming is. And you and I both know that changing anything inside of the affiliate, even just moving the rubber band 6 inches to the right on the wall, people are going to lose their mind. So what would have been a better strategy would have been to incrementally start to change the programming over time. So starting to introduce how we were programming at CrossFit Rife to the other facility in small doses. We also would have done it from a bottom up. I would have taken some of the coaching staff there and we would have had them introduce it rather than us push it down and say, because it felt like it was a kind of a hostile takeover in that scenario. Now, localized, that would have stayed the same because there was no need to change that scenario inside of this situation because like we were not changing our programming at CrossFit Rife. So we just had to change it at the other facility. And then from a timing standpoint, I would have done it more slowly. I would have done this over 4 to 6 months. And the reality is, had I just made some simple changes and looked at it through this lens, we probably would have had no fallout and very likely could have grown that gym a bit faster and been much more successful there. Now, would that have panned out? Would we have not ended up in a legal dispute with the landlord? Who knows? But the point is like that's a lesson learned with something very simple like changing program about how I did it very poorly so that you guys can avoid something like that moving forward. And this is a really, really interesting matrix or useful matrix in that sense to figure out like, hey, are you about to step on your own toes or can you manage this change a little bit differently? Because people don't like change. Like as human beings, we just don't like it. So we're more akin or we're more adept at managing it if it's done appropriately. And this is a way for you to think about that as well. So we've talked about different strategies. We've talked about managing yourself. We talked about getting clear. Now we're going to get into a little bit more of the tactics. And I want to talk a little bit about some communication models because if I'm clear about what it is that we're doing, who we are, and I'm clear about we've got a good strategy, this is how we're going to manage whatever is going on in the gym, you can still screw this up by how you actually do the communicating, meaning like how I disseminate the information. So I want to walk you through 4 models on communication and how these can help you effectively. And model number 1 is called the GTFP model, okay? And we're going to start with this triangle right here. So everybody has been communicating with somebody where at some point during this person's babbling, you find yourself asking a question like, what are we talking about? Like, where are we going? What is the point of this story? And what you're experiencing is this. This person is taking you on a very long, windy road through the story, telling you the details, talking about all the things that happen, introducing the characters to eventually get to the point. Okay. Now, if you're somebody that likes to go on rides, you might be totally fine with this, right? We have people on our team, they're like, listen, you just start telling that story and I'm here for it. And you can get to the point whenever you're good, well, and ready. Okay. But we have other people on our team who are like, what are we doing? I don't want to be on this ride. This is terrifying. Can we stop this and can I get off? Okay. And what you do is you simply just reverse the order of the information. You just start with the point, and then you outline all of the logical reasons in the story about how you came up with the point. So I basically did that when I started this. I said, hey, the first model is GTFP, right? Then I told you what this is. Now, what does GTFP stand for? It stands for get to the fucking point, okay? And this is an interesting model because with this model, only a subset of people are going to pay attention and go on the whole ride, and you will be losing people as you're taking forever to get to the actual point. In this model, almost everybody will go along. You're telling them what exactly it is that you're going to talk about, and then you're telling them logically how you came to said conclusion, right? Because in this scenario, everybody wants to know, but I'm just starting with the point, and now they're more bought into the story because they know where it is that we're going. So if you're sitting down with the team and you're going to be talking about doing, again, something like changing the programming, be like, hey guys, we're going to change the programming. That's the GTFP, getting to the fucking point. And then I'm going to lay out all the reasons logically about how I came to the conclusion. And now everybody says like, yeah, That makes perfect sense to me. Let's go ahead and do it. But if you start telling this long, drawn out story, and they're like, dude, what are you talking about? Like, I don't understand the story about muscle ups and this one time when you were doing the regionals back in 2012. Like, what is happening right now? They're like, dude, like, I'm not here anymore. Like, I checked out 45 minutes ago. From a leadership standpoint, really understand, like, I want everybody to be paying attention, because if I'm putting out information, it should be important to them, because if it's not, then I probably shouldn't be disseminating the information. But I need to understand, like, how I communicate those. And this is also a really important tool we joke around inside of our team. Like, if you have somebody that kind of defaults to this one right here, you can just give them a triangle and you can just go like this. Be like, hey, can you please get to the point? Right? We do this all the time in Zoom meetings. If somebody's just rambling, we'll just DM them a picture of a triangle and they'll switch tracks and they'll get to the point and move on really quickly. So that's model number one, is the GTFP model, which is get to the fucking point. So the next model we're going to talk about is the inside out model. And in any sort of business or any sort of system, you're kind of going through this circular process. If you're familiar with OODA loop, which is a kind of a military terminology brought up from the aviation world, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. This is very similar to an OODA loop circle. So let's say you're going through you're revamping your sales process, right? So I'm going to plan whatever it is that we are going to revamp inside of the sales process. I'm going to assess what's happening inside of those changes, and then I'm going to evaluate whether those changes were either good or bad, or maybe they were in the middle. And I'm going to keep working through that cycle over and over and over. And a lot of times what we find ourselves doing as leaders is we find ourselves kind of working on the business in this scenario. And I may or may not do a rant on the in versus on thing, but we find ourselves over here observing all of this happening, and this is typically ineffective. Where the reality is, like, this is incorrect. The leader should be central to that whole process. You should be in the middle of it so that you can quickly react, you can quickly communicate, and you can quickly drive what you want to happen. And this is a really effective way of managing this process. And again, we call this inside out because you should be inside versus outside. And a lot of people are doing this backwards because they've gotten really romantic about this idea of working on the business. And screw it, let's go on a rant here. So in versus on the business. There's few things that make me as angry as this idea of working in versus on. Now, don't get me wrong, I understand the concept, but it leads people down the wrong path, right? Like, fundamentally just kind of doesn't make any sense from a verbiage standpoint. I've never had somebody ask me what I do, and I'm like, well, I'm currently on the fitness business. Like, I'm not on the fitness business, I'm in the fitness business, right? It's just that's not how you say it. And I've never met a business met a business owner, regardless of the size. And I know people that run billion-dollar businesses that are not in the business in some sort of capacity, right? You're always in it, right? Unless you're getting mailbox money because you bought a stock in Facebook back in like 2012, then you're in the business, right? Now, where you're in the business basically just starts to elevate over time, right? But you're never really on the business. On the business means like you are in some sort of like board member position, but that's just fundamentally not how it works. It's definitely not how it works inside of a CrossFit affiliate. I have never seen, and I mean this as a statement of fact, I have never seen a successful CrossFit affiliate where the leader was not entrenched in what it is they were doing. Now, this doesn't mean that you work 80-hour weeks, right? But it does mean that you are still integrally involved in what is happening in there, right? Maybe you've got a lot of systems in place and you can drive initiatives a little bit easier, but being out here almost always ends up in something breaking and a significant downturn to the business where they're going to have to reinsert themselves back here. And if you take too long to move from here to here, life gets really, really painful. So just understand how this works. If you find yourself like really far removed from things, you should consider pulling yourself back in, not necessarily to turn the wrenches and flip the switches and turn the knobs, but to get back in there to work through this process, but doing it from inside the machine, meaning, hey, I'm making sure that they're designing this plan appropriately. I'm real time assessing what it is that's happening in there. And then I'm going through the evaluation process with my team to make sure that we've made a good decision. So again, inside out method, if you find yourself out there, you're probably in the danger zone. Try to pull yourself back in, but I want to be very clear. That doesn't mean that you're doing the thing. That's not what I'm saying at all. I just mean that you are in there and you know real time what's happening as it's happening. All right, moving on to model number 3. This is the what you know model. And most of us has been through this cycle, meaning like anytime you're new in a space, you end up falling victim to this model just out of pure ignorance. So when we think about the scope of what you don't know and what you know, if you are immature, ignorant, it typically looks like this. So I've got this circle, and then I've got this outer circle, which is much bigger, right? And if I'm doing a bad job, if I'm ignorant, if I'm unaware, what I know is in the inner circle. And then what I don't know is in the outer circle. And I'll give you a perfect example. So this happens very often with newer coaches, and maybe you read The Supple Leopard or something along those lines, or you took a course that had something to do with the, functional movement course, which I'm a fan of all of those things, by the way. I'm just trying to give you guys an example. And then they come back onto the floor, and you're watching somebody coach, and they're using terminology incorrectly, right? Pet peeve of mine, which is if you don't understand it, don't say it. Okay. And what it ends up looking like is what you don't know is a much smaller circle than the things that you are talking about, right? So effectively, you're talking about a bunch of shit that you don't know anything about, okay? Now, why is that important? It's not because it annoys people, it's because it fundamentally degrades trust. Trust decreases when you speak like that. So there's nothing wrong with not knowing stuff. I don't know a ton of shit. We all don't know everything that we've not learned yet, for the record, okay? So it's nothing wrong with not knowing things. Where it starts to get problematic is when you're talking about a bunch of things that you do not know anything about with the hopes that people will think you are smarter than you actually are. It actually works against you. It works in the exact opposite way, which is people pick up on that stuff very quickly and they will start to not trust you. So what we want to do here is we want to reverse this. I want to make sure that what I don't know is in the smaller circle. And then what I know is out here. Meaning, I talk more about the things that I know about and less about the things that I don't know about. And again, how does that impact your interaction with your team? If we're talking about trust, it very much increases how much people trust you. Again, let's use a simple coaching analogy. Very often in a level 2, when we're working through some of the seeing and correcting drills, working through with a new coach, and they need to correct something that is happening inside of the group. Doesn't even matter what it is. They could be knees in, rounded back, whatever. Maybe their stance. We'll use stance as an example, right? Their squat stance. They're unsure about where the person's squat stance should be. And they're kind of bouncing around it. And I kind of look over to them and I say, "Are you going to do something with that?" And I say, "I don't know if it's going to work." I said, "Nobody knows if it's going to work. You got to try it first." Now, how do you manage that scenario? And what I tell the coaches, just tell the athlete that you don't know if it's going to work and then make the change. I say, "Hey, Sally, I have no idea if this is going to work, but would you mind widening up your stance a little bit?" What I've done in that scenario right there is I've gained a tremendous amount of trust because I've been openly honest about the action that we were about to take. And I say, "Hey, listen, I don't know if this is going to help, but we're going to try it." And you can do the same thing when you're managing with your team. And if you don't know something, there's nothing wrong with saying, "I don't know." So at the Naval Academy, that's where I went to school, when you're a plebe, you only have 5 responses. So if anybody asks you anything, you can only say 5 things, right? This happens for like a year. You can only say 5 things, right? So you can say, "Yes, sir." You can say, "No, sir." You can say, "Aye, aye, sir." You can say, "I'll find out, sir." And you can say, "No excuse, sir." Those are the only 5 things that you can say. So yes and no are pretty obvious. Did you do this? Yes, no. Aye, aye means I understand the command and I will do it. Okay. No excuse means I fucked up. My bad. I'm sorry. Okay. Now, what they're trying to teach you in this with the 5th one is I'll find out. I'll find out is a longer way of saying I don't know. Okay. And what they're saying is I don't know, but I'm going to go get the information. I'm going to bring it back to you to the best of my ability. And it would behoove all of us to use that a little bit more often. That's one of the biggest things I've taken away as being a leader is like, be honest with people. If you don't know the answer, say, I literally don't know what the solution. And I try to say that a lot in team meetings. It's like, I don't have the answer here, but like collectively, I'm pretty confident that we can find the answer here. And this builds a tremendous amount of trust because people now know you're not blowing smoke up their ass and they trust you more. You say, hey, I'm pretty confident that this is the answer. But also, when you say, I don't know, this relieves the pressure off of everybody in that scenario. It's like, well, if he doesn't know, then I definitely probably should know, which point we can all go find the answer together. So again, use this kind of or this what you know model. Don't talk about shit you don't know and be okay with saying, I don't know. I'll find out. I'll get you an answer. You'll be better off for it. All right. So the fourth model is what we call the deep care model. So again, if you guys haven't figured out, I love 2x2s and I love XY axes because I think they just create really good visuals for understanding some things that are either gray or somewhat complex and starts to frame them up a little bit better. But on the y-axis, we have standards. On the x-axis, we have care. So if I have all the way up here, this is what we would call tough love, meaning like this is something, if you were an athlete, you probably experienced tough love for somebody was, never let you kind of slack off. They were on you all the time, and they're just constantly up your ass about being better and improving your skill sets. Now, conversely, you have on the other side, which is if you maybe have a younger sibling or something like that, where you have unconditional love, where like you just let that person get away with absolutely everything, right? They're never held to a standard and they just kind of get away with murder, right? And what happens is inside of a lot of organizations, as a leader, we have some people that we treat with tough love and then some people that we treat with unconditional love. And we end up going back and forth through this washing machine or dryer, however you want to look like, and then really creating an environment where it's really confusing for the people on your team about how they're supposed to interact with you because they're never really sure if you're going to give tough love or you're going to give unconditional love. And they're not really sure why certain people get certain treatment and why other people get other treatment. And I think it's just recognizing how these things work. And the reality is that true care involves a combination of both. And it really lives over here, which is I have high standards and high care. And what that means is having hard conversations, whether you like people or not, and really understanding that like if I want to have high standards and I really want to care for them, that means I'm going to have to say things that sometimes is going to hurt people's feelings. But understand, I'm not saying it to hurt their feelings, but sometimes people are just going to get their feelings hurt. Nobody wakes up out of bed and just like, I'm going to suck today. Like that's not how people work, right? And understanding that in a lot of instances, people that are coming into the gym, and maybe even you if you're watching this video, have never been told that they're doing a poor job. Like not ever in their entire life. People are afraid to talk to them or they're just in an environment where that's not something that happens on a frequent basis. So understand like when you institute tough love in some scenarios, like this might be the first case of that. You just have to do it with compassion, right? And how do you go about doing that? But if you really care about people, you got to hold them to a high standard and you got to make sure that they meet the high standard. And by doing so and doing that with some compassion and some empathy in the way that you address people and how you interact with them, whether it be tone, time, place, all these things, this is how you really show people that you care about them because the reality is like most human beings, most people want to be held to a higher standard. They just don't have somebody in their life that's willing to go there because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, and nobody really likes to do that. But I will tell you, it does get easier with practice. This is something I feel very fortunate to have been a part of inside of seminar staff. I've never, ever been in my entire life been a part of an organization that has such a high feedback loop and has people that are so good at demonstrating true care, which is people that care about you a lot, but are really willing to bite the bullet and tell you that you're doing a bad job. And I feel very grateful for that. And again, I try to send the elevator back down and share that with the people that I interact with because I appreciate it. And everybody that you share this with long term, they're going to appreciate it. Just understand in the short term, it can be a little choppy road. So that's an example of that. I have another model that I want to show you that's very similar to this one to help reframe this conversation because a lot of times when we're talking about affiliate owners and they're having coach problems, it's due to this dynamic right here. It's just like the ability to have hard conversations and how do you navigate that. Okay, so another way to look at this, backed by popular demand, 2x2 matrix. You guys are probably getting sick of these, but I really do think this stuff is important. And again, the more mental models that you guys have with which to think through this, it really starts to make things that seem ambiguous and gray it starts to bring them into focus and make them a little bit more binary, because when I can lay them out in a logical fashion, it makes it easier to get past all of the kind of fluff and the random variables and stuff that really doesn't matter to get back to the actual point. So if we're looking at a 2x2 matrix, we've got goals and then we've got reactions, right? So over here, I've got hard and soft. That's what she said, Nate. And then over here, I've got punitive versus mentor. So if I'm thinking about, right, something that happens, somebody does something incorrectly, understanding like whether the goal was hard or soft, meaning like it was a stretch goal or it was a fairly easy goal, should by and large dictate like what is my reaction to said thing based on the importance of the task. So let's just say somebody was in charge of, let's say you're going to put your GM in charge of running payroll, right? So hard goal, meaning like if you get this wrong, outcome of that can be pretty disastrous. People don't get paid on time. Maybe that causes financial issues. Understanding like that's a big goal. It's a big task to be handed off. And let's say that they get it wrong, right? And thinking about, hey, is my reaction going to be punitive? Like, am I going to dock this person's pay? Am I going to yell at them? Or am I going to fire them? Or am I going to choose to mentor them, right? And what we'll tell you is that like great culture lives in this combination of goals that are hard while mentoring people, right? So great culture lives up here. And what this really highlights is this. I have never seen or been a part of an organization where mistakes weren't made. It's not a thing, right? And understanding that mistakes will be made. And the harder the standard gets, the harder the goals become, the more likely it is that there will be mistakes. And what we have to do is we have to manage how we react to said mistakes. I played for a guy in college that he was punitive all the time, right? Everything was a punishment. Everybody sucked. If you made any mistake, you'd be coming out of the game, always yelling. He just literally never had anything good to say to anybody. And he turned a lot of people off in that scenario. And conversely, I've worked with some other people, either prior to him, coaches that I played for, or even leaders that I worked for in the military that really had really, really high standards. And people that I worked for, and I had huge fuck ups for some of these people, but they didn't choose to punish me in that manner. They chose to mentor me and give me a better opportunity to succeed in the future. So understanding like if you want to have great culture, understand where that great culture lives in this balance of what is your reaction and then what were the goals that you set. And then understand like you really need to be calculated about how you react to things. So that actually is a really good lead into another story, which is understand there's people react based off of your reactions. Now, what do I mean by that? There's a time and a place to be frantic or act with urgency. And then there's a time and a place to be smooth like a duck. And when you're immature or you're early leader, you tend to make the wrong decision most of the time. So everything's an emergency all the time. So I'll give you an example. I think maybe last year we had a pretty significant issue with the website, meaning like the website wasn't working. The forms on the website weren't working. Now, a little bit more seasoned in my affiliate owner days. And so I kind of calmly went over there. I knew that this is a big deal, meaning like now this highlights a whole nother discussion about risk and, key channel risk. Different discussion, different video, but the website's down, meaning like nobody can contact us about joining the gym and submitting an inquiry. And I walked over and I said, hey guys, like the website's down, we're working on it, all these things. And this goes on for about a week. The website's still down. 2 weeks, website's still down. And I'm just like, inside I'm dying. I'm like, this is fucking bad. Like we need to get this fixed. Otherwise this is going to create a problem. I'll skip to the end. About a 15% loss in revenue because of this. So I realized that I was trying to fix that when I actually needed the rest of the team's help. And I said, hey, I realized I did a really bad job of kind of communicating how important or how emergent this was. And the team told me, they're like, well, we didn't really think it was that big of a deal because you didn't act like it was a big deal. Now, understand that like if you act like everything's a big deal, this can go sideways, because if everything's a big deal, then fundamentally nothing's a big deal. But also, sometimes if you never have any sort of deviation in your behavior or reaction, people don't know when something is an emergency. And that's really, really important. If something is an emergency, it doesn't mean you need to freak out, but it does mean I need to explain to everybody, like, hey, we're putting everything on all stop. Like, this is really serious. If we don't fix this, the business is going to tank. And whatever else you're doing, stop. I'm not going to freak out, but I am communicating to the team how emergent this is moving forward. And then we need to fix it fast, quick, and in a hurry. So just a little lesson on how you react and how maybe underreacting sometimes can also be bad. Okay, so now what I want to walk through is how do you rectify this concept of control versus accountability, right? So I know I want to have high standards and I want to keep people to those standards, but how do I make sure that my interaction with my team is appropriate with regard to holding them to said standards? And this is where a lack of understanding of how things work can cause you to be a poor leader. And I'll explain why that is the case. So this is, again, the idea of accountability versus control. So you've got these two spectrums laid out here. So I've got span of control, and then I've got span of accountability. And obviously understand that span of accountability is obviously larger than span of control. Now, obviously, what they can control might be different, and in a lot of instances is different than what they are accountable for. And understanding how to manage those two, and I'm going to give you a real life example of how this works as well. So what they can control versus what they are accountable for. And let's use something like sales, for instance, right? What they can control is conversion rate. What they can't control might be something like lead flow, right? So understanding, like, keeping them accountable inside their role as a sales manager really has a lot to do with like what they have control over versus what they are accountable for. So they are accountable for high conversion rate, right? But they do not have control of the overall lead flow that comes into the pipeline. So if I'm giving somebody a hard time about we're not hitting the numbers that we want, but they have no control over the number of leads that come in, understand how this impacts my ability to communicate with them and impacts their mindset and their involvement in the company. And this is a really important. It's just like, sometimes this just means like, take a breath and figure out what's going on here. But so again, span of control versus span of accountability. So they're accountable for the full sales process. If I expand this out just a little bit further, their control, this area right here, from here to here, is where people get really creative. If I say, hey, listen, I need you to figure out every possible way, and I'll give you all the resources possible to increase conversion. Like, I'm not here to solve that problem for you. I'm here to give you the resources, the time in order to make that happen. They're like, okay, I can figure out a way to make that happen. Like, let's go ahead and do that. And what I like to tell a lot of people on our team is like, I don't have the answer for that. I'm here to set the rules for engagement, and then I'm going to tell you what I want the desired outcome to be, and I'm going to let you guys problem solve that and come back to me and let me know what you figured out. And a lot of people love that. A lot of people can get really creative inside this very small window. Now, if you go past that and you expand the span of accountability so wide that it's outside of both their control and their ability to be creative, this is where people quit, right? Because there's no winning in this additional area right here. You've made them accountable for too many things, much of which they don't have control over. So again, going back to this idea of the sales process, like if I have somebody and I'm holding them to a level of accountability, and that accountability that I'm trying to hold them to is largely predicated on something they have no control over, like the number of leads coming through the pipeline, they're going to quit. There's no room for creativity there. It's just a pressure bomb that's going to go off eventually. So understanding, like, am I holding them accountable to things they control or things that they do not control, and understand, like, where can they be creative? And again, I like to use the sales pipeline because that's where a lot of people like to lean on salespeople, and salespeople are usually pretty high pressure individuals anyway, but understand, like, you can cause them to implode in some of those scenarios because you don't understand how the sales process works. Going back to like understanding the language of business. And if you understand, through and through the mechanics of that pipeline, I can logically hold them accountable to a specific conversion rate because I know how this works. And then I can shift that based on what happens on the front end. If I'm looking at the pipeline, I understand that, like, oh, leads have dropped off. Well, then the output of that pipeline is not going to be the same anymore. And holding them accountable for that when they're still converting at the same rate, or in some instances even higher, is not fair to them. We just have to figure out how do we give them the space to be creative, to be autonomous, but not create such a span of accountability that it's a lose-lose scenario for them, at which point they quit, and I'd probably let somebody that's good walk out the door. Last, as far as models go, is what we need to do is we need to teach people what they owe everybody else and what everybody owes them. And fundamentally, what we're talking about is like, how do we explain how each department or each component of the business is supposed to interact with other components of the business? Because you can create a clear vision, you can create standards and all that other kind of stuff. But if people inside of the team have no idea how to interact with each other, I'm still going to run into a problem. And this is as simple as just outlining, here's what you owe her, and here's what you owe him. And now it's very clear about what's going to happen. Okay, so when we're looking at it, let's talk about the three different components of the business. So I've got sales, marketing, and I've got fulfillment. We'll call that operations. There's a ton of stuff kind of jammed into operations, but understand that this model doesn't work with more than three components, right? So it does have its limitations, but it still will kind of hammer home the point. So when we let's look at the relationship between sales and marketing. So when I look at sales and marketing, I need to know what sales owes marketing and what marketing owes sales. And fundamentally, what sales owes marketing is customer feedback. So sales needs to tell marketing what they're seeing on the front end of the funnel, right? So that marketing can speak to the right things via social media, they can adjust their email campaigns, and they can interact with the client appropriately based on what sales is seeing at the very, very top end of the funnel. Now, what marketing owes sales is social proof, right? They're trying to make it as easy as possible for sales to make a sale, right? Their job is to say, hey, we're going to put all this stuff out into the ether, and we are going to give you guys as much ammo as humanly possible so that you guys can be successful. Now, fundamentally, what does fulfillment owe marketing? They owe marketing success stories, right? Fulfillment just fundamentally has to do their job. So let's just say they owe success stories, meaning they got to deliver exactly what we said we were going to deliver in the marketing, and they got to tell marketing who that is. They say, hey, Jenny over there had a success story. This is something you guys should capture, and you guys should take that and you should tell the world about it. Now, what does marketing owe fulfillment? Marketing's job is to tell fulfillment what they need in the way of content. So marketing's job is to communicate, hey, can you guys ferret out and find or produce content that is going to speak to the customer forward facing? Because it's not marketing's job to come up with all of the ideas. It's marketing's job to tell the people that are doing the thing what it is that they need. And then that way, fulfillment can help marketing create that content, and then they can push that stories and those things forward to the sales pipeline. And then sales job is really easy. Now, lastly, let's look at the relationship between fulfillment and sales. Sales owes fulfillment sales qualified leads, right? Sales job is to make sure that they filter, they deselect, or they select on the front end so that we're not giving fulfillment bad clients, because bad clients impacts our ability to create success stories. So sales job is to make sure that they don't let people that shouldn't get through the pipeline get through the pipeline. It's their job to filter and do this quickly. So we want sales qualified leads and we want them fast. Now, fulfillment's job, or what they owe to sales, is data and authority. Meaning, fulfillment's job is to track the numbers and why this is successful, so that when sales is talking to customers or they're trying to deal with objections, that they're armed with the appropriate information, that they can give that information to people, so that they're speaking from an authoritative position and not always trying to convince somebody. Be like, say, 90% of people get their result when they do this thing, right? So when we think about inside of Affiliate University, like, almost everybody is going to get their money back 2 to 3x in the first year. Something to the tune of like almost 80% or higher are going to get their money back when they work with us inside the first year, like 2 to 3x, right? We know that. So when people are talking to sales is armed with that information. So be like, oh, it's a lot of money, I'm going to get my return. Or like 80% of people get 3 times what they spend inside of this when they do what they're supposed to be doing. And all I'm doing is laying out the scenarios that understanding how each department is supposed to work with the other department is a way for you to make sure that the team interacts cohesively. Because a lot of times, if one component doesn't know what the other component owes them, if sales doesn't know what they owe marketing and marketing doesn't know what they owe sales, everybody's operating in a silo and things start to break very quickly. And now we have people marching in one direction, we have people marching in the other direction. So it's really important that we lay this out and we communicate not just our expectations, but what are the expectations across departments, right? And even if you're a one-person band, it doesn't matter. You still need to understand the relationship across these 3 different components. You might be doing it all, but you still have to understand what are their deliverables and what should one be feeding the other over time, because this is how you build a cohesive team. Because when you bring in somebody behind you to fulfill that role, they're going to need to know that information anyway. So I want to make sure that this is all very clear to people. And what you can do is when you lay all this out and everybody understands clearly where we're going, what the mission is, what the objective is, and they understand how they're supposed to interact with everybody, what you end up doing is you end up not wasting a ton of time. You end up creating an immense amount of efficiency inside of the machine. This eliminates a lot of the requirements for meetings and blame game and all the other shit, because most of that stuff is predicated on like just nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing. Nobody knows what they owe anybody, and that's always a problem inside of an organization. All right, so we've gotten through the bulk of this. Number one, thank you guys for sitting through the video this long. This is stuff that we help with affiliate owners with all the time, right? So again, we worked with over 1,000 affiliates over the past 4 years. We work with affiliates all over the world. If you're watching this and you find this stuff valuable and you need help with this kind of stuff, this is what we do, right? So we eat, sleep, and breathe this stuff if it's not that obvious to you. So if you're interested and you want help with this kind of stuff, set up a call. I'll be happy to work with you. But now let's dive into some of the tactics inside of this. So when we think about managing the team, I have to basically identify some basic components of that. Who am I communicating with? When am I communicating with? Where am I communicating with? Where am I communicating with them at? And then how am I communicating? So obviously the who has some different components to that. So the basic is I've got full-time versus part-time, right? So I've got full-time staff and I've got part-time staff. Maybe you don't have full-time staff, you just have part-time staff, but understanding who I'm talking to starts to dictate some of the other components of that. Now, when I'm going to be communicating with people, that can go into daily, that can go into weekly, and that can go into monthly buckets. So some people you're going to communicate with daily, and depending on where and how you're communicating with, you might be communicating with everybody daily. And then you might have some people in your team that you meet and communicate with weekly on specific things. And then probably you're going to be meeting with everybody in some sort of component on a monthly basis. So an example of this would be we are communicating with everybody daily inside of Slack across a number of different channels about different things that are happening inside of the affiliate. I do have 2 weekly meetings with specific key players inside of the affiliate that we meet on. Both of those meetings are about 30 minutes long. And then monthly, we have a full team meeting where we get everybody together and we walk through a bunch of different stuff and look at what is coming up in the near future. Now, where am I going to be communicating with everybody? So my recommendation, I see this done of all of these things. This where is typically done poorly the most, meaning where is this communication happening? So I see a ton of stuff where people are using WhatsApp chats, they're using email, they're using text message threads. All of that stuff is an absolute disaster because it's typically ends up with a bunch of memes and jokes, and something that was really important is way up the thread and nobody's scrolling that far up to go figure out what the hell you just said. So my recommendation is keep it simple. There's really great tools out there. We use the shit out of Slack, right? And the beauty of Slack is you can have channels in there, so you can compartmentalize conversations in there, whether it's a new members channel, facilities channel, schedules channel, client wins channel, client concerns channel. You can have all of these things in there and everybody can interact in there. Slack integrates with damn near everything at this point. So you can push a bunch of information there from your different CRMs, and it becomes this hub for all things information that are happening inside of the affiliate. Now, how is going to be both digital and in person, right? And digital is faster. This is how you kind of crowdsource or maximize and speed up your communication. And just fundamentally looking at how are the different ways you're going to do this. Who, I've got full-time versus part-time, or key player versus non-key player. When, daily, weekly, monthly. And then where my recommendation is Slack. We use it really, really effectively. I understand if you don't set up Slack correctly, it's a nightmare. If you set it up appropriately, it's a fantastic tool. I was very anti-Slack early on. It's because I just didn't know how to use Slack. But now super useful, and we use it for absolutely everything. And then how? Digital, and sometimes that stuff is going to be in person. So when you're thinking about communication, you want to center your communication around these certain things. Who's getting what and when, right? So your key players, you're going to be communicating with daily anyway. And then maybe you're having weekly meetings with those key players. And now when you're having those meetings, I do recommend that those meetings have agendas, right? So everything should be trust but verify, and everybody should have to show their work. So if you're sitting in a meeting, there should be listed line items in there that you guys are talking about and refining and either getting rid of and adding new things to on a regular basis. And nothing should be like, yeah, we're good. Anytime you're talking about numbers, metrics, things that we're trying to move, we want to make sure that everybody has to show their work, right? There's a level of accountability that is baked in when somebody has to pull up a spreadsheet and have to speak to everything inside of that spreadsheet or the CRM, and it just keeps everybody really honest, and it makes everything really clear and objective. So I highly recommend trust but verify. Everybody shows their work, and meetings will be much, much cleaner. So have an agenda. When you're running any meeting, make them shorter versus longer. If your meetings are long and overdrawn, you're just running shitty meetings, and there's nothing worse than a shitty meeting. We all know that. So have an agenda, be on time. I could run a whole video on how to run meetings. So I was very anti-meeting, and I still don't love meetings, but I really, really hate inefficient meetings is really where that's coming from. So just a general breakdown with regard to communicating with your team. We're talking about tactics as far as like the mechanics of communicating. This is just a basic overlay of how you would start to communicate with your team. Now, if you are using that kind of communication format, what this is inherently creating is, whether people know it or not, it's creating feedback loops. And feedback loops are incredibly important. Right? Now, what is the important thing about feedback loops? Right? When we're talking about feedback loops, what's the most important thing? Number one is feedback loops need to be objective and they need to be at a high frequency. That's the most important thing about feedback loops. Now, what do I mean by objective? Meaning we're not going to argue about feedback that's coming or going, right? Meaning it's objective. We could use something simple like class evals. Right? An objective piece of feedback is like, hey, remember, we start classes on time. Class starts at 4:00. We started at 4:02. Now we can get into how do we resolve that coach being late? Like what was going on? Were they messing around the computer trying to check people in? Were they just not paying attention? Was somebody being disruptive in there? How do we go about start doing it? All of those things are variables inside of that. But the objective component is like class was not start on time, right? Now, the high frequency means it needs to happen as close to the event as humanly possible. Now, I don't mean that you run out onto the floor and tell the coach when they're starting the brief at 4:02 that they're late and they're starting the brief at 4:02. Meaning if I'm evaluating the class, I would eval the class and we would give the feedback right then and there after the class is over because I want them to be able to implement that as quickly as possible. So when we're talking about feedback loops, this is really important. I talked about this in a different video, but this is really important. The most highly functional organizations in the world have two things, right? So they have an official performance evaluation and they have high frequency of what called drive-by feedback. And what does that mean? Drive-by feedback is literally just unofficial, quick conversations about things that are happening in the gym. Now, if you're looking at both those two, which one of these is more important? This one, and it's not even close. High frequency of drive-by feedback is one of the most important things that you can do to get high feedback loops and good culture inside of your affiliate for a couple different reasons. One is the higher the frequency I give feedback, the more likely I'm going to get people to implement feedback. The other thing that's kind of a secondary benefit of this is when I'm doing drive-by feedback, it's usually in a one-on-one situation, at which point I'm not kind of scolding people or giving feedback in a public forum, which can get pretty dicey, particularly if you're not really great at giving feedback or you're inexperienced at giving feedback. So when you're thinking about feedback loops, these are the two things that I want to have. But understand that the more important one, if you were going to throw one of these out of the window, you would throw official performance evaluations out of the window and you would just keep the high feedback because if everybody's performing well, then who cares what their official performance eval? You're not going to fire them, right? So again, not to say those are not important, but if you had to choose one, I would choose the drive-by feedback. And this gets into looking at like things like coach evals, right? So all of this, if I've done everything that I've talked about up to this point, we can get to this point where we can optimize and we can maximize our ability to deliver service on the floor. And what does that mean is like giving people feedback on how they coach classes. Okay. Now, if people have never gotten feedback on how they coach classes, this might be a rough go. I will tell you it would be significantly easier if they're clear on what it is that we are doing and who we are. If I've set the expectation about what is important for us and how we interact with the client, if I communicate well with them, right, and I let them know what the measurement for standard or what the measurement for success is. So When people ask all the time, like, hey, do your coaches, how do they feel about feedback? I'm like, they don't care. We can give feedback at any point, right? Meaning official or unofficial feedback, because everybody knows what they're being measured against. Like, we came up with the criteria together. So I could pop into class and I can give an eval whenever I want. Nobody's going to freak out. They're not even probably even going to pay attention to me. They're not worried about that because they know how to succeed. We did that and we built that together. And this is really, really important. Now I want to uphold that standard. If we start to deviate, then we're going to catch that. And I'll give you guys an example. A couple of years ago, we were working with a gym, and this gym owner, they owned 2 gyms, and one of them was a bit younger, and then one of them was bigger than the other one, meaning like he had a big gym, we'll call it a big gym, and a little gym. And we were talking, he's like, I'm just really having trouble at my other facility. And I said, hey, how often are you giving coach evals? And he was like, once a quarter. I said, okay, we're going to need to increase that number. He's like, well, how much? And I said, we're going to need to give 3 evals per coach. And he was like, in the quarter? And I said, no, per month. He said, I've got 11 coaches at that gym. And I said, well, easy math says that's 33. He said, 33 evals a month? And I said, can you think of a better use of your time? You're telling me right now that you have a culture problem over there. Like, I don't know where else you would spend your time other than going over there and getting that rectified. So I sent him on his way and ghosted me for like 3 months. I hit him up. I was like, bro, where are you at? Like, what is going on? Like, you're not responding. I don't know where you're at. Like, did you fall off a cliff? Like, what's happening? He said, I'm doing what you told me to do. He's like, I've been given evals until my eyes bleed, right? So in that 90-day period, he gave almost 100 evals. Now, why do I tell that story? Because later on, and not too far into the near future after that, we ended up connecting about some other stuff. And he's like, dude, he was like, my small gym is now my big gym. He ended up selling that gym for a sizable amount, all because he went back in there and fixed the culture, right? And again, it wasn't forever. It was 3 months to have a complete turnaround of that gym. And thinking that you're just going to give people 1 eval a quarter on something that they do, I don't know, in some instances 50 times a month, is not going to be a high enough frequency for them to make any sort of meaningful change, right? So understanding how all of the things that we discussed really do trickle down into this idea of giving feedback, right? If I start at the top, what I've done is I've given myself the ability to give critical and then sometimes harsh feedback, but my team now understands that I'm doing this from a place of love because I want them to be better, because all of this is about the client, and they know that they are at the center of that client's success. And in order for that client to be successful, we have to make sure that we do our job as well as humanly possible to make sure that we're all on the same page about what the mission and vision is. We're all on the same page about what the standards are. That we're communicating in a high clip. Because if we're doing all of those things, the client's going to get exactly what they want at the end of the day. And that is how you build, train, and retain a really, really good team. Now, I'm not saying this is easy. And for many of you, this is going to be your first kind of introduction to some of this stuff. But this is really, really important. If you take all this information and you start taking little pieces of this, what probably now seems like an egregiously long video, I get it. And you think about, hey, I'm going to try to implement like 1 piece of this every month, and you took 12 months to do that, I can promise you with great certainty that you'll have a significantly better team and therefore a significantly better gym by implementing all of these things. So that being said, I hope this video helps. Having a great team is one of the coolest things of all time. I've been really, really fortunate to be a part of some really awesome team in my years, both in sports, in the military, and now in the private sector as an entrepreneur. And I can tell you, it's like driving a high performance team of people that are like go-getters, that want to be good at things, that really hold themselves to a high standard, is fucking awesome. So that's what I want for you guys. If you guys have questions about anything, go ahead. There's a link somewhere around this video. Go ahead and click that. I'd be happy to set up a call with you. But outside of that, I hope you guys take this. I hope you guys find this content valuable, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for checking out this episode of the Best Hour of Their Day podcast. We appreciate you listening and choosing to have us help you in your passion for coaching and affiliate ownership. You can find more episodes just like this on all podcast platforms. If you're interested in learning more, you can reach out to us on any social media platforms, or you can visit www.besthouroftheirday.com to book a call. If you found this episode helpful for you, please share it so that we can help other coaches and affiliate owners to help build a bigger and stronger CrossFit community. Thanks for listening.